All right, enabling new characters online. So this is it's like not a talk title you would usually expect at a ZK type conference or event. So what is this talk about? I chose this sort of abstract title because I think we've been centering around a lot of interesting ideas in digital identity, zero-knowledge proofs, witness encryption, fully homomorphic encryption, how these things interact in how the future looks, the future internet looks. So I wanted to actually initially start by kind of like presenting a little bit of that, like a speculative vision of what the future of a digital identity might look like. And I'll promise to start fuzzy and abstract, but get pretty specific by the end. I'll then get into sort of like the last 7 or 8 months of progress within OxPARC. With a note that this is by no means just my work. This has very much been a collective effort of a bunch of teams within and without OxPARC. And in some sense, I'm just kind of like weaving the narrative about what I think we're working on. And then finally, I'll point a little bit towards what I think the R&D program for this kind of work is going forward for the next 6 months, for the next year. So our thinking has evolved a lot over the last 7 or 8 months, but I think this has been one of the recurring questions that has been core to the notion that there's something interesting or different here. It's literally how will we represent ourselves to each other in the future? How will we label every action we do? Like every choice I've made in kind of like how I present myself here, like the cool OxPARC hat, the like all black, the raggedy hair. It's sort of, like presumably like I've chosen those things because it conveys something about like what I think other people socially think that is, and that in some way is enriching my message. So what does that mean for like general internet communication? Is there something interesting there? And the reason we think that there's something interesting here is there are 2 trends that seem like they're accelerating. And usually in technology, when you see something that feels like it's accelerating even at the very early stages, even if it's still like maybe like sublinear, but it still feels like it has a little bit of hockey stick, you want to pay attention because maybe something crazy happens very, very quickly. So there are two trends. One, there's this like massively growing network. Well, it's not massive yet, but it's growing very quickly network of global social relationships that are represented cryptographically. And also, in parallel, there's 2 ones, but that should be a 2. This term that Brian has coined called programmable cryptography, the feasibility of using programmable cryptography on consumer hardware, i.e. like end user devices, has really kind of like become much more clear. And in fact, later on in the talk, I'll give an example of something where we're like, we didn't think this would be possible, and then it was possible like a few weeks later. And so that's interesting and maybe a little scary even. So what do I mean by global cryptographic social networks? Ethereum is certainly one example. Like when people interact on Ethereum, like when you're voting on a proposal, so you're snapshotting your kind of like ownership at some point in time, you're automatically entering a social relationship with a bunch of other people. And that social relationship is cryptographically verifiable. There's a set of signatures that if you just like presented that to someone, they could tell that this has happened. Like this is true, these people are related in this way. So DAO snapshots, NFT trading communities, obviously. There are also non-chain examples of this. One that we've thought a little bit about is DKIM, which is like an mail authentication protocol, email authentication protocol. So a bunch of email messages, just by virtue of like being sent, are signed by the mail servers, and so we have a record of this person sent me this mail for a bunch of people in the world. GitHub as well. There are places where you use your RSC key to sign stuff, and so that's creating a kind of social network there too. But one of the things that's true about all of this and feels very like grassroots and interesting and possibly explosive is that there's no like governing body that is like choosing that these these networks should grow in this way. It's just like people doing things online, and by virtue of doing things online, all of these new cryptographic social relationships exist. And so the other piece is programmable cryptography. And so very, very simple diagram, but I wanted to like break it down to the bare minimum. But the things you can imagine here are things like ZK and witness encryption. So what happens when you have everyone's involved in these like massive cryptographic social networks that span every single interaction you do online, very hypothetical. But then they also have the ability to make really nuanced statements with programmable cryptography, really nuanced ZK statements, really nuanced witness encryption messages for any function of like the relationships in that cryptographic social network. Obviously, it's like, ZK still feels hard to do on a consumer device. The world isn't cryptographically socially linked today, but if these two things explode, what happens when every human can do this every single time they do anything online? That's kind of like the motivation of this question. And the thesis that we're sort of arriving at is that there's going to be a variety of new kinds of characters and personalities online. We're still workshopping terms, but character creation seems to be like one of the things here. It's kind of weird to me that we think about like Twitter, for example, and you have maybe your main account and a couple anon accounts. But then when we play like games and stuff, you have like a bunch of different characters based on how like you want to play. Like for some MMO or RPG or something like that, like you will play a bunch of different classes based on how you feel at different times and how you want to interact with people. Why won't that be true for like the normal world? All right, so that's enough fuzzy. So I'll now get a little bit into sort of what the last 7 or 8 months have been like, kind of how we've gotten to the point of thinking about this. So it kind of all started or it started a little bit before this, but there was a confluence of ideas at OxPARC did a ZK Learning Group #1 last December 2011, or 2011. And this is what I was talking about before. We kind of came together, a bunch of us in this room actually, and we're like, okay, this is kind of a weird idea. Like, what if you could make a ZKP associated with a new like public key that is like somehow related to a bunch of other public keys for all these like social relationships that exist. But it was like, oh, but you can't do SecP 256K1 operations in Gros16, and you can't represent 256-bit numbers in a 254-bit field. It's not possible. But then, like, once we knew this was like maybe interesting, like a bunch of the smart people here were like, no, actually, maybe it is possible, and it happened. So there's kind of like this pair project, Circum-East DSA, which kind of has led to some of the Halo 2 ECC work that Yi and Jonathan presented earlier. And this little sample app we built called Proof of Planet, where we basically had an Ethereum smart contract where you could mint an NFT if you presented a zero-knowledge proof that you owned one of these dark forest planets, which itself is an NFT. So it's like Ethereum talking to Ethereum via zero-knowledge. And that was really cool and very interesting. And there were a couple learnings. So one, it became clear that if the really interesting thing here is like representing yourself to other people, maybe this doesn't need to be on chain. I think we're always in a rush to like see what we can do on chain because it feels like if you just do things on chain, somehow you make money. But like it was like on-chain verification is very expensive. What if you're actually just trying to prove to someone else that something is true? Like that can happen just in the web browser. Honestly, like you can just do verification in like anywhere else. You don't need to do it on the chain. So then the next series of experiments were Cabal and ZK Reddit, heavily inspired by earlier work from OxPARC called ZK Message, which is used group signatures for pseudonymous messaging. And this was kind of like a sprint towards DevConnect last April. The big kind of, and Leo sort of alluded to this earlier, but one of the big sort of like accomplishments here was doing a full SecP 256K1 priv to pub proof inside a MetaMask snap. And I, like, as someone who like personally spent a lot of time kind of like herding cats there, it was like really annoying. I think we were proud. Like so really quickly, what Cabal was, or Cabal still exists, is it's collab land, so NFT gated discords, but with zero knowledge. So you don't have to give your address to a server to get access to Discord. You just present a proof to a server. So the notion is like, what if you have like these pseudonymous Discord channels where people in there know that they all share this like interesting Ethereum state, but they don't know who each other are, like what kind of interesting conversations happen there. But yeah, we had to do this proof to pub thing, and we had to basically put a zero knowledge proof inside the MetaMask software enclave, and it became pretty clear that this was like this is like not a tenable way to do this long term. If we have to, wallet teams aren't necessarily people who are likely to be able to implement like pairing-based crypto in the long run. It's just like not their specialty. So why try to force that into every wallet? Like maybe like the surface area of the thing that we ask wallet teams to do should be much smaller. And additionally, it just felt weird kind of like working with private key. Just like the notion of a private key that potentially is really valuable passing around in multiple security levels of like environment just didn't feel like the right approach. So that led to the OxPARC Summer Residency, where actually the app that we're using for Anon questions today was developed, Hey Anon, as well as so one of the challenges with Hey Anon is that we use ECSA signatures as sort of the private information, but it's not, ECSA signatures aren't deterministic. So that also led to this other research direction we'll hear about later today from Ayush on a new nullifier scheme we have for that. Also led to sort of like exploring Halo 2, exploring other curves, other crypto systems like RSA. This is one of the tweets from a group. So that basically we made these like Twitter bots where people could only post if they are like a certain identity, a certain Ethereum identity, but without revealing who they are. And in this case, it was everyone who was involved in this Gitcoin grant round corresponding to ZK Tech. And sort of the thesis there was like, maybe people have something to say about how the outcome of that round that they wouldn't share publicly or share with their public identity, but would want to kind of share that they were a part of it. They would want to add that credibility. And so here's a tweet, and actually this link, similar to the ones for there, like it links to a proof that you can independently verify that basically shows you that this tweet, this message from the ether came from someone who was a part of that round. One of the really fun sort of features for Hey Anon, which it sounds kind of simple, but like it was a huge, I think, unlock for me at least, was implementing replies, because you can use these bots if you're a part of one of these groups, and you can reply to any other tweet on Twitter. So now it's like literally like we have like this new character, this new group character that is just engaging in the public conversation, perhaps around itself, right? Which is just really bizarre. It's like it does feel like it's pointing somewhere to the future. And of course, I mentioned this a bit before. I won't go into it too much in this talk because I don't want to take. I think other people might be talking about it later. But there's other crypto systems we explored, email, GitHub, etc. Okay, so yeah, a little bit now about sort of what I think the upcoming 6 months at least look like, and I may talk a little bit about like the upcoming 5 years if I have time, or what I think the upcoming 5 years are. But this is sort of like at a very bare bone, and Brian kind of alluded to this earlier. What our like R&D project sort of is structured around. It's like we build cool apps. And then we're like, oh, we should build better technology. And that then enables cooler apps. And then it's like, oh, this is the better technology that this could use. And this virtuous cycle, this feedback loop seems to be really productive for application R&D, but has really been kind of like the life force behind this whole endeavor. So to get kind of specific, so some of the things in the near future. So Yi and Jonathan talked about Halo 2 ECC work. We're pretty intent on migrating over to Halo 2, largely because it feels like there's a lot of kind of like ecosystem momentum there, but also we think that, similar to the sort of like the on-chain observation earlier, perhaps we don't need verification time to be really, really small for these proofs. Like maybe it's okay for verification time to go up if we can get prover time down. So it allows us to sort of like tweak that trade-off, as well as like explore using lookups and stuff like that, which will probably make things faster. On the app side, we're constantly looking for new ways we can use these weird Twitter bots. So of course there's today's Q&A. Let's see, has anyone actually asked a question? Oh, my internet's not great. Is anyone with the good internet, let me know if someone's asked a question. All right, whatever, it's fine. So the in-person experimentation, we have some ideas for like interesting pseudonymous chat around the merge for people who are around for the early days of the beacon chain and like are responsible and involved. On this side, I mentioned earlier the nullifier work. We also are pushing forward on figuring out mobile. I think we've largely constrained ourselves to thinking in a web browser, but a web browser is a pretty constrained computing environment. Mobile devices, we think, will allow us to use much more resource utilization. On the app side, we've been sort of like digging around a lot of interesting DAOs, looking for people who are kind of living in the future, and gotten really involved with the Nouns DAO, and think that they're pretty excited about like exploring pseudonymous net chat applications. So that's something we're building out as well. On this side, again, productionizing other crypto systems. And finally, we have some ideas for Cabal v2. So that's probably also going to be happening in the next 6 months. And how am I on time? Oh, yeah. OK, so, and finally, a small announcement, but we're introducing a new entity called Personae Labs, which is sort of like incubated out of OxPARC. That sort of is we see ourselves as sort of the steward of the kind of like pushing the curves down to bring us closer to this world of like thousands of new characters or millions of new characters online. And yeah, that's basically it. How am I on time? OK. Oh yeah, I'll quickly talk about this. So I copied this image over here because I think bear markets are like a good time to think more about like why we build technology and like the ideology behind it. Like technology is ideological because technology fundamentally shifts power. During bull markets, we're all like racing to liquidity mine whatever we can and like get the best yields and like MEV NFT drops, like get in like right at the beginning of an NFT drop. But I think during a bear market, we have some more time to think and like place ourselves somewhere on a spectrum of different political ideologies. And so nothing really specific to say here other than, and for those of you who play Civ 6, you'll recognize these as the three sort of pillars of future government in that game. But nothing very specific to say here other than like now's a good time for us all to sort of like think more about like what kind of world we're building towards and what kind of things we want to create. And that's it. Questions? All right. OK, wait. We got a few. So an apprentice says, "Hi, this is not John." And then an apprentice replies with, "This is a good post." All right, John. A sorcerer says, "What do you think will be the most appropriate representation of off-chain credibility, email, GitHub, etc., on-chain, NFT badges, SBT, etc.?" Okay, that's very interesting. So I actually don't think there needs to be a strong distinction between on-chain and off-chain. Kind of the way I've been thinking about it is perhaps like the proofs that represent cryptographic relationships anywhere are consumable in many different places. Like those proofs you can use to sort of like say something on Twitter or Discord, but you can also use it in a smart contract. Maybe smart contracts will gate based on your credibility, based on like who you are, based on what the proof means. So really it's about the kind of like the proofs and propagating them, and the interpretation layer can be whatever. But to get quite specific, like you could imagine for one of these hand-on groups, like let's say there were another Gitcoin grant rounder on ZK Tech. Everyone who was in this Gitcoin grant round and created one of those proofs, perhaps like they get slightly better prices or something like that in this round. They get like a slight overweighting in the quadratic voting formula. That's an example of something that can be used on chain. Oh, and then we got a couple of wubba lubba dub dubs. So I'm just not gonna engage this. Yes.
You talked about the explosion of characters in this new world. Have you talked about each character can operate in different contexts and how that might manifest itself in this realm. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. It does. I mean, I think characters are somewhat context dependent, but I think the lines will blur a little bit in that some characters will implicitly kind of like move between contexts. I think it will be. There's an interesting counter question, which is, are there interesting characters that are interesting because they're confined to only exist within a single context? Maybe. I actually think, yeah, it's interesting to see the lines blurring. If a character is defined by just the zero knowledge proof that means a thing to a lot of different people, that character can exist anywhere because that proof can be interpreted by anyone. And I think that's one of the wonderful things here. It's like, if I go back to the, actually I don't want to go back to the first slide, that'll take forever. But at the very beginning, it's talking about how there's like these universally sort of like verifiable cryptographic social networks. So anyone can verify the zero knowledge proof for one of these things. So like the character is completely context independent in a sense.
Yeah, an example would be, today I'm operating in the context of, Jay Carpenter at the Applied ZK workshop. 2 days ago, I was operating in the context of Jay Carpenter at the Science of Blockchain conference. And although they're similar, they're slightly different, and there are different communities associated with each. So just bringing it up.
I think it's a really
point.
Important lens because there are certain things that feel like there's certain events, and I think we can look to like Ethereum history a little bit to understand that. Like everyone knows kind of about the DAO hack. So if you are someone who was like in the DAO hack got hacked, that's a character that exists in like every crypto context, and it's kind of context independent.
Thank you.
Hey, like a very nice talk. I want to bring a less philosophical question, like a more concrete technical question.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you. There's a lot of developer struggles trying to like deploy a prover in the MetaMask snap, right? So that there are multiple regards, struggling the performance, struggling the security, like dealing with private keys. Do you think there are some space like we can make it easier? For example, building some like mini modular things that allows the applications pulling the proving keys into the inside of, like it's kind of a snap inside of snap. It's kind of
So our approach. So I've also been thinking about and talking to other wallet teams and trying to like ascertain sort of like what kind of like how hard this will be to change a lot of people at the same time, basically. I think the right answer is to really reduce the surface area of the function that you're like introducing to the software enclave. Like ideally, it has very little complex cryptography. So actually, Ayush, who will be talking later, will talk about this sort of this deterministic signature of private key for ECDSA or for SEC P256K1 that is like much simpler. And so like it would be much easier. Like it'd be much easier to convince every wallet that this is the new nullifier function for ZK apps, like almost like a signature function. And it's like super easy to implement. Here's like a 20-line implementation in this repo, right? Than to be like, implement zero knowledge proof with a private key, and here's the circuit, and here's all the machinery. So I think roughly it's like, rather than trying to find like a new model to introduce a really complex piece of cryptography into a software enclave that I expect to be many software enclaves because it's all wallets, I'd rather just really reduce the surface area of that function.
But do you think there a follow-up question, do you think there is a need to actually inherently do that, right? So for example, I can definitely see the cases if you want to kind of like a two zero knowledge proof compose together, or like more like moving forward. I'm not I guess I'm not fully convinced this is a problem you can just like purely purely get away of because like you want to having like multiple like ZK apps interact with each other. You want the user side of zero knowledge proof generation. But still like I think it may be easier to have some like a common infrastructure built in the wallet rather than ask like every DApp developers they have to deploy their like a zero knowledge proof generator in their DApp. I guess that's.
It's possible. It doesn't feel like the fastest route or the most effective pragmatic route to me, but we'll talk about it. We can talk about it afterwards.
Great.
Thanks.